Welcome back to Curious Christianity. I'm Adam. Today we're talking about the Sabbath in regards to Genesis chapter 1. This has been a subject that I feel like sometimes almost gets swept under the rug by young earth creationists and maybe some others. But I think it's very important that we do look at Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4 talks about the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is the seventh day in the creation week. And the question is this: does the Sabbath simply mean a 24-hour day, and is that how we should always look at it? Now, when we read Hebrews chapter 4, it lists this little quote. So I declared and on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. Now, when it says rest there, it's talking about the Sabbath rest of God. But if it's talking about the Sabbath rest of God, then why is it talking about this idea of they shall not enter my rest? And it even clarifies a little bit. It says, right? And yet his works have been finished since the creation of the world. For somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in these words: on the seventh day, God rested from all of his works. So it's clearly referencing Genesis. But then he says, and again in the passage above, they shall never enter my rest. So is he just talking about a 24-hour day? It seems obvious that we should interpret Scripture with Scripture, and Hebrews clearly does not interpret the Sabbath to always mean a deliberate, direct 24-hour day. And of course, when you include the context of Genesis, when it was written, who it's written to, there's this idea that the kings, after they were done ordering their kingdoms, rested. They kind of took up their prominence. They took up their seat of dominion and authority. And that's kind of what it meant for them to rest in some sense. So, and Hebrews 6:4 says, therefore, since it still remains for some to enter that rest, and since those who formerly had heard the good news proclaimed to them did not go in because of their disobedience, God again set a certain day, a certain day. He's saying, oh, yeah, they've called a particular day, calling it today. This is when, a long time later, he spoke through David in the passage already quoted. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. And so, really, he's talking about this idea that people that believe and put their faith in God enter his rest when they are done with their works. In other words, the Sabbath is also representative for mankind of his lifespan. And when his life is over, he'll enter the Sabbath rest if he submitted himself to God. So a man is done with his works when he dies, not simply on a work week. There are of course other passages that are going to deal with that. But here it clearly says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did. Now, part of their point here is that when did God rest from his works? After the creation was over. After the creation was over, God rested from his works. He no longer was going to work on creation. And that's like a permanent thing. In other words, God's still resting. You want to enter into God's rest now. And hence, while they repeat this phrase like today, you enter into his rest today, it's kind of this constant proclamation of like, hey, it's kind of the Old Testament gospel in a sense almost. You want to enter God's rest. We always talk about heaven. In the Old Testament, they're kind of talking about entering God's rest. And so this is interesting because, of course, the other very, very prominent passage that everyone brings up is Exodus 20, talking about the fourth commandment. For in 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth, during the whole work week. So therefore we shall rest on the sixth day. But is this setting a precedent that it's like, well, we want to take this very, very literally? I think it's important to note, it's like already there are things here that are not completely analogous to God. In other words, a man shall rest because he is weary. But does God rest because he was weary? No, he doesn't rest on the seventh day because he's weary. So this isn't a perfect analogy. But furthermore, it's not a perfect analogy because man is required and told to do this every week. God only did it one time. And here in Hebrews 4, it's kind of talking more about this one time idea of setting up, right? There's one rest, one Sabbath. In other words, God rested on the seventh day in Genesis, and that's what it is now. It's today. He is resting in his he's resting. He's in his, I guess I do want to say the cosmic temple sort of idea, but he's kind of set up his kingdom, and it is our goal to enter into that rest. So it does seem like there's this large amount of different wordplay with the word Sabbath, and it has a lot of different meanings throughout the Bible. And you can clearly see these other Sabbaths that take place. You have the Jubilee Sabbath, you have these 7 times 749, the big Sabbath where you're supposed to let the land rest. You have all these different Sabbaths that take place. And is the point that it's like, well, because God did exactly like this, we're supposed to merely repeat that exact thing? I think part of the bigger point is that the Sabbath day is set up as holy, and it's holy because God rested and he set up that day to be a special day, and we should, observe it every week. But it's also more than that. And I think Hebrews clearly points to the idea of it being more than that, because I think we need to take the Bible very seriously. And if you take Hebrews chapter 4 seriously, I don't know how you can arrive at any other conclusion other than Sabbath has more than one meaning, and that the Bible doesn't mean for us to mean it in only one way, even including what it says in Genesis, because Hebrews chapter 4 is specifically calling back to Genesis. So we need to be very careful in our hermeneutics and pay close attention and make sure that we are using all of Scripture and not just eisegeting and reading into particular texts that we want to. So study hard, and see you in the next video.